Now, Labour have come out against the United Arab Emirates-backed takeover of the Daily Telegraph newspaper and the Spectator magazine. Shadow Culture Secretary Thangam Debonair has said that foreign governments should not own British national newspapers. I kind of thought that was something we all agreed on. We're still awaiting the government actually stopping that sale going ahead. Joining me right now to discuss all of this is Fraser Nelson, who's editor of The Spectator. Good morning to you.
Good morning.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Explain for our audience, who perhaps may not have heard so much about this sale going ahead. Your current owners have been forced to sale. The United Arab Emirates have put in a bid. Tell us why you are concerned about this.
This is the first time that an autocratic government, in fact any foreign government, has tried to own a British publication. It's never happened before, and we don't have laws to stop it happening because nobody would really think of trying to buy another country's newspaper. Now, Britain's got a free market system. We're pretty liberal. We tend not to have rules restricting what foreigners can buy. The issue here isn't foreigners. We don't mind. The British press has a long tradition of foreign ownership, quite successful. The Financial Times, for example, is owned by Nikkei of Japan. But the Financial Times also turned down a bid from the United Arab Emirates. And that's for an important reason, that the Emiratis are a government. Governments shouldn't own newspapers. The principle of a free press means freedom from government. There is no other definition of free press. Not just freedom from your own government, freedom from anybody's government. So if you're going to defend a free press, you stop it, press being owned in whole or in part by governments.
What do you make of, I was fascinated to listen to an interview that you did on the Radio 4 Today programme this week, where you were questioned by a presenter about, individuals who own newspapers, the rich men who used to own the Telegraph, Rupert Murdoch owning the Times, the Sunday Times, the Sun, others, don't they have influence? Don't individuals who are very rich, don't they have a say as well? What's the difference?
I know, it's a sort of funny question there. It assumes that if a government doesn't own something, then it falls to people to own something. There isn't a sort of third force out there. But there's a sort of common misperception about the role of proprietors in newspapers. I mean, take Rupert Murdoch. I don't know how many papers he owns, but a good number. Now, there's no way you can pick up, the Australian, the New York Post, the Times, the Sun, and think all of these papers somehow reflect what Rupert Murdoch thinks. He is a publisher. His skill is in selling newspapers. Newspapers only sell if the relationship is with the readers. Now, take The Spectator, for example. We were owned by the Barclay brothers. They were billionaires, but not once in my 14 years as editor did they ever tell me what they think or suggest what I should write. We are 100% financed by the readers. That is to say, the money we get from selling magazines and subscriptions covers all of the costs of the journalism. Now, that is the relationship when it's not owned. So if you do cover your costs, that means that your relationship is with your readers. Now, obviously, this business needs to be arranged by somebody, but the idea that proprietors sit there telling people what to write, that's just a joke. Papers would not sell, the readers would not buy them. They would not be, nobody's forced to buy a newspaper, nor would they, if the newspapers don't basically are of use to them. So that's why the idea of the all-powerful proprietor as a dictator of policy is a myth and always has been.
And certainly, I've worked for a number of different newspapers and media organisations, and that's certainly been my experience. Now, there's not only this bid from the UAE, it's RedBird IMI, and it's a fund 75% financed by United Arab Emirates. And some people have said, oh well, but it's a private firm, it's not the government, even though the man in charge of it is actually, the Deputy Prime Minister of the United Arab Emirates. So that's a nonsense, really. But there is also another bid, which would effectively give them a minority stake, but would involve Rupert Murdoch, the Daily Mail and others as well. Are you also concerned about that? Does it make a difference whether the United Arab Emirates have 1%, 49%, 51% or 100%?
I'm not sure that it does. My concern here is that governments should not own newspapers. They shouldn't own them outright. They shouldn't own stakes in them. So my concern all along was about being part owned by the Emirati government. If you look at the original RedBird deal, the Emirati government was supplying, I think, something like 3/4 of the funding. Now they would say, no, it's not the government. It's the Deputy Prime Minister acting in a personal capacity. But as you say, I'm not sure that passes the smell test. But right now, there is talk that the Emiratis are thinking, okay, let's see how we can move this under the regulatory radar. Can we make it 49%, 25%. I'm not sure that will assuage the political concerns that we're hearing today. The government a few weeks ago was having concerns about the Emiratis owning 15% of Vodafone. Now, if they're concerned about that on national security grounds, and Vodafone effectively is a telecoms infrastructure company, then a similar shareholding national press ought to can raise these national security concerns. Now, this afternoon, word is we're going to hear the government telling us what they're going to do. Now, it could well be that they're going to put this off the menu completely and say governments should not be owning in whole or in part national newspapers. If so, this issue can finally be put to bed.
Well, we've certainly heard that's Culture Secretary Lucy Frazer. We're expecting a statement from her. I suppose one of my big questions on this is, why does the United Arab Emirates want to own a national newspaper and a national magazine in this country? What is the purpose of that? OK, they can make money. A lot of people have taken over newspapers and magazines and not made money. I know Spectator's certainly doing very well. But what do they want to own it for? What do you specifically? I mean, I understand your philosophical objections, but do you have any practical fears as well about what would happen if they did own the magazine and the newspaper?
Well, the motive is pretty straightforward. I mean, not just the Emiratis, but autocratic governments world over have been slowly seeing what they can buy in democracies. We saw this with China trying to buy Huawei. We see this of other Gulf states trying to buy things. The Emiratis own, I think, a stake in Heathrow Airport, in the Dogger Bank wind farms. So the structure, it's basically they're trying to buy influence, buy soft power, if you want to call it that, by buying up the critical infrastructure of democracies. So it gets to a stage where we're at right now because they've succeeded. A lot of government members are thinking, well, we can't annoy the Emiratis because if we don't let them buy the Telegraph, then they might not give us the money we need for Sizewell C, etc. So for a relatively small outlay, this is cheap by Emirati standards, you buy influence in a democracy. This never used to happen before the crash, but only when the crash of 2008 happened did democracy start to think, hang on, we've got so much debt, we basically need the money. So we're going to turn a blind eye to the Arabs. Take the Emiratis, they're now allies with Putin. They are buying his oil, they gave him a hero's welcome last December. Ordinarily, that would make us think, hang on, are we sure we're going to get into bed with them? How much of our critical infrastructure are we going to give to Putin's allies? But that conversation doesn't tend to take place because there's a lot of people and a lot of government departments now who want to stay on the good side of the Emirati government in order to get the extra investment. So what this does, this strategy of buying critical infrastructure means that you buy influence in democracies and they will turn a blind eye when you start to create alliances with some of the bad boys. And right now, to think that the Emiratis are basically allies with Putin at the time of the Ukraine war, and yet still we're regarding them as our best friends and we want close relations, it's pretty strange because you'd think that when stakes are so high, when people are dying in Ukraine in their thousands and we're doing our best to help Ukraine, we might be a little bit hesitant about getting into bed with Putin's allies. So that is the instinct which so far the autocratic states, if you want to call them that, are successfely buying off via the
well, I mean, let's call them autocratic states because that is what they are. We've seen it with China, we see it with Qatar on the World Cup, we see it with Vladimir Putin and all that Russian money that's been in London over the years. We see this playing out, do we not? One of the reasons I think it's so significant and so important, I mean, The Spectator, you played a very important role in sort of challenging often the narrative, again, of our government on things like Brexit, on things like net zero, and indeed on lockdowns and policies like that. And I want to just ask you, before I let you go, about the latest revelations about the COVID inquiry that's ongoing. And we see, more scientists coming out and saying, look, this is a totally biased inquiry. It's all about, shouldn't we have locked down sooner? That's pretty much all they care about. But crucially, the latest revelations about Sir Patrick Vallance. He was the chief scientific officer in this country. We saw him on the press conferences every evening. We were all locked in our homes. And he has, it's been revealed, wrote in his diaries in summer of 2020 when it was announced that schools in Scotland were going to go back in September, but children would be required to wear masks all day, every day in the classroom, hallway and everywhere. That was a decision by Nicola Sturgeon. And he noted in his diary that that was a political decision not based on medical evidence, that children were at no risk, etc., etc. That then followed that policy. We know from other diaries, other documents in the Westminster government, that Matt Hancock then pushed for children to wear masks in England schools as well. I know you and I both knew this at the time, and we spoke about it. We campaigned on it. These decisions to put children on wearing masks all day, every day, were done for no medical reason, but purely scientific reasons. So, apologies, purely political reasons. What do you make of these revelations coming out and the abject lack of outcry from journalists, from medics, from scientists, from teaching unions, from the general public, from the government, from everyone? What do you make of the fact that people just shrug and move on?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that just in the same way that there are only a relatively small number of people questioning lockdown when it happened right now, there's still a relatively small number of people interesting to look at the evidence and to say, okay, at the time we didn't know anything, now there's lots of studies. For example, where are the studies showing that face masks worked? Did they ever emerge? Why did the government change its advice from saying don't wear face masks, that was the scientist's original advice, to making it legally compulsory? Was that done on any scientific evidence? Now, Patrick Vallance's remarks on Nicola Sturgeon in Scotland suggest that was political. I suspect the decision here was simply as political. You can't be seen to be outdone by Sturgeon. I've been through the Matt Hancock WhatsApp files where he was concerned about being left politically behind by Nicola Sturgeon. But like you, my main concern is that if we cared about the science, if we cared about getting the response right in the next pandemic, in the next panic, we need to be learning the lessons now, asking, what did the science show? What did the figures show? Now, the lack of curiosity there, I think, is very worrying because the people who need to be asking questions don't seem to be very interested now that the answers are finally available.
Absolutely. Well, you did a fantastic job throughout that period. It gave a lot of us a lot of hope. Fraser, I really hope we get the decision from the government today, which I think would be the right one. Thank you very much, Dee Fraser Nelson, editor of The Spectator there. Quick thoughts from Benedict Spence. Let's go back to sale of The Spectator and The Telegraph.
I mean, we were talking about the benefits of the free market and how it's done very well for this country, but actually I think there's a lot of naivety in this country about what the future is going to involve, and that is not, I'm afraid, going to be the free market. If you want to maintain your position as a first world country and not as a client country of states that are not necessarily friendly, it will involve some protectionism. And this is something that actually the Tory party, the current party of government, doesn't really understand because it still sort of sees itself as the party of Thatcher.
No,
I think it's something that
George
Boris
Osborne,
Johnson...
who's leading part of this original bid, I mean, he was happy to sell off most of Britain to the Chinese.
This is a major issue, that there is still this idea that everything should necessarily be for sale. But let's forget things like newspapers. Should actually foreign states have any influence over energy production or transport infrastructure or food? I tell you what, the Chinese spend a lot of money on is buying up American agricultural land. You tell me they're doing that for, you know, the good of their own heart?
Come on. No, exactly. Big question marks there. Thank you very much indeed.